Hiring a team used to cost six figures. In the last 18 months, AI just replaced 80% of it, which means for the first time, one person can run a business that looks like a 10-person company. So in this video, I am going to show you the model and exactly why it works. You've probably heard Naval Ravikant's idea about the four kinds of leverage, right? Labor, capital, code, and media. It's a very, very powerful framework, but here's the thing. Most people only know it as a tweet, or they've seen it quoted around on LinkedIn, or maybe some of you have even read the almanac. Read it if you haven't, by the way. But many people have never looked at how each layer actually reshaped business, or what happened to the people who embraced it and the ones who didn't. And I think if we want to understand what AI really means for us right now, we cannot just repeat theory. We need to go back, look at the history, and see how leverage transformed ordinary businesses, because the same pattern is about to play out again, only faster. And when you see this pattern, you will understand why AI is not a simple new or another technology. It is the most explosive form of leverage that we have ever had. And it's about to change the course of history for humans almost as fast as the asteroid changed it for the dinosaurs. Okay, so let's talk about labor. Okay, this was the original leverage, so to speak, because in the very beginning, most businesses were pretty tiny. Okay, a shopkeeper, maybe a couple of apprentices, and that was it. And growth was painfully slow because every bit of progress depended on the hours of the people inside. But then came factories, and suddenly you could scale just by hiring hundreds or even thousands of workers. And this was the first real form of leverage, labor. The more people you employed, the more output you were able to create. I mean, think railroads and steel and textiles. Entire industries exploded because they figured out how to pile on more workers. And that is why the late 1800s, the largest companies in America had tens of thousands of employees. For the first time ever, size equaled power, but it didn't last. Because the moment automation arrived, human labor stopped being the bottleneck. Henry Ford proved this in 1913 by reorganizing labor into an assembly line. He was able to cut the production time of a car from 12 hours to just 93 minutes. And then all of a sudden, 10,000 workers didn't beat 1,000 workers. What mattered was how efficiently you organized them with machines. And as you can see, labor was the first form of leverage, but it was fragile. Every time a new layer appeared, automation, capital, code, it replaced the old one. And that pattern had repeated in every revolution since. So, okay, labor clearly was the starting point. But what came next was even more powerful. It was no longer about how many people you could hire. It was about how much capital you could deploy. So let's look into the capital revolution and using money as leverage. Because after labor, the next breakthrough was this. Okay, because once machines entered the picture, hiring more workers wasn't enough. You needed money, you needed the capital, massive amounts of it, to build factories and railroads and refineries and steel plants. And this is how the age of capitalists began. You can look at John D. Rockefeller, who didn't become the richest man in history by working harder. He used capital to build oil refineries at a scale that no other competitor could match. Or if you look at Andrew Carnegie, he did the same with steel and financing plants that dwarfed anything before them. So capital became the new weapon. If you could raise funds, you could buy machines and build infrastructure and outcompete anyone that was still depending on labor. And that is why Wall Street and the banking system became so powerful, because they controlled who got access to this leverage. And it's the same story today. Entire industries are built and broken not by who works the hardest, but by who can access capital. Private equity firms buying struggling companies, restructuring them, flipping them for billions. You can look at venture capitalists who fund startups that can scale faster than their competitors. But again, it didn't last forever. Capital was super powerful. It still is to a certain extent today, but it was also limited. Ordinary people couldn't raise millions to build the next oil empire or launch a business from scratch. And then a new layer appeared, one that wasn't locked inside of factories or banks, a layer that anyone could access if they had the skill. So let's look at code, because this gave permissionless scale. This was a new kind of leverage that no banker or boss could gatekeep. In the 1970s and 80s, software left research labs and entered businesses. You could write instructions once and the machine would execute them 1,000,000 times without getting tired. And for the first time, logic scaled better than labor or loans. And then by the 1990s and 2000s, code quietly became the engine behind everything. Inventory reorders that once took a back office of clerks ran on a midnight script. Point-of-sale systems that once required custom hardware became software that was rolled out with a file update. Reservation systems replaced phone banks. One database, infinite customers. And this is when balance of power truly shifted, I believe, because for the first time, small groups of engineers could outcompete entire corporations. And that is how today's tech giants were actually born. In garages, Microsoft scaled operating systems into every office. Oracle scaled databases into every industry. Google scaled information itself without ever laying a single brick. We're no longer the factories or the refineries of the past. They were lines of code. Infinitely repeatable, globally scalable. And the results were staggering. YouTube, I don't know if you know, but had 65 employees when it was acquired by Google for $1.65 billion. Instagram had just 13 employees when it was sold for $1 billion. WhatsApp had 55 employees and it was sold for $19 billion. And Shopify scaled to a multi-billion-dollar company empowering millions of stores with fewer staff than a traditional retailer would need just for a single chain. So clearly code turned process into asset. A workflow captured in software stopped being a task and became a system that ran on its own, flawlessly, infinitely, permissionlessly, if that's a word. But even code had a ceiling. You could automate the world behind the scenes, but without attention, it didn't matter. And that's why the next layer of leverage became so powerful, and that's media. For the first time, you could not only build once, you could be seen everywhere instantly. So let's talk about media and the infinite distribution. Because in the early 2000s, distribution still meant fighting for shelf space and buying ads and printing books. If nobody carried your product, you basically stayed invisible. But then the internet turned media into the next layer of leverage. Yeah, you could create something one time and then distribute it everywhere instantly at almost no cost. And that's why the balance of power flipped again. A single video uploaded to YouTube could reach millions of people overnight. A musician on Spotify could release tracks globally without a record label. A writer on Substack could build a paid newsletter audience that was bigger than many traditional magazines. And an Instagram creator could launch a brand with just a phone and a story. I mean, entire industries collapsed because of this shift. Look at Encyclopedia Britannica. It was built over 250 years, and it was replaced almost overnight by Wikipedia. Tower Records, once the giant of music retail, fell to streaming. Newspapers that had been local monopolies for decades lost their readers to blogs and Twitter and YouTube commentary. Meanwhile, the winners weren't massive corporations anymore. They were individuals who understood media as leverage. I mean, look at Mr. Beast. He uploads once and he earns for years across billions of views. Look at YouTubers like MKBHD, others. They've built channels with audiences larger than legacy TV networks combined. Media made visibility permissionless. Anyone, anywhere could reach millions of people across the globe without asking a publisher, without a studio, without asking a producer for approval. So here's the shift in simple terms, in my opinion. With labor, you multiply output by adding people. With capital, you multiply output by buying capacity. With code, you multiply output by writing logic once and letting it run forever. And with media, you multiplied influence by creating once and distributing forever. But here's what's fascinating. Each layer of leverage didn't just change how businesses scaled, it also changed how fast they scaled. I don't know if you realized, but for labor, it took centuries for factories and industrial labor to reshape economies. From back to the 1700s to the early 1900s, factories and workers powered the Industrial Revolution. But then when you look at capital, it took decades. From the late 1800s through the mid-1900s, from capital markets, investors, banks, they ended up dominating the industry. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, they proved that money was more powerful than muscle. And then look at the code takeover. It took less than a generation, actually a few decades, from the 1970s and 80s all the way to the 2000s. Software scaled companies like Amazon, Microsoft with almost no limit and allowed them to go from garages to global empires. And then media became king in the 2000s to the 2020s. And this is literally less than 20 years. This time it happened so much faster. YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, they gave individuals global reach. A single creator can now build an audience of millions, but with AI, it's different. And it's happening right now. And it happened in months, right? The adoption curve is collapsing in front of us. You might know this already, but ChatGPT hit 100 million users in 60 days. That is the fastest technology adoption in human history. And you can clearly see now that every revolution is moving exponentially faster than the one before, which means the window to adapt keeps shrinking and the cost of being late keeps rising. Clearly, even media had its limits. Attention is powerful, but it doesn't actually do the work. And that is why the next layer was able to change so much, because for the first time, the thing creating the output and the thing creating the attention can be the same system. So let's talk about AI as, in my opinion, the fifth lever. the multiplicative leverage. Okay, I believe this is the most explosive form of leverage that we've ever seen because AI is not a simple layer that you add on top of everything else. It's a multiplier, an amplifier of every layer that came before it because it makes labor almost infinite by replacing repetitive work. It makes capital more efficient by automating operations that investors used to fund with headcount. It writes and it executes code on its own without a team of engineers, and it generates media, text, images, videos at a speed that honestly no creator can match. And that's why this is not just another technology cycle, in my opinion. It is the collapse of the old hierarchy of leverage into one single tool set that is available to everyone and anyone instantly. And the adoption curve and its impact are unlike anything that we've ever seen because we are already seeing this transform industries and companies everywhere. Solopreneurs are launching digital products and courses and newsletters with systems that would have required full teams probably just 3 years ago. AI does not just extend human effort. It collapses the cost of building an entire organization into the power of one person. And that leads us to the real question. If one individual can suddenly do the work of 10, what does the business of the future actually look like? And for this, I feel like I need to introduce you to a concept that completely revolutionized the business world. Now, back in the 1980s, business thinker Charles Handy introduced this model that was a radical shift for its time. He called it the Shamrock organization. Until then, companies were seen as basically giant pyramids, okay, thousands of employees that were stacked in rigid hierarchies. And what was new was the fact that Handy said the future wouldn't look like that, okay? Instead, it would look like a shamrock with 3 leaves. Core staff at the center, the executives and the essential specialists, then contractors and partners that were the outside experts that you would bring in for specific skills, and then flexible workers that were the part-timers, the temps, the seasonal staff that you would use to scale up and down capacity within the company. And it was super innovative back then because it challenged the assumption that everything had to be done in-house. And for decades, it shaped how companies thought about efficiency and about flexibility. And honestly, companies like Procter & Gamble, for example, or BP or IBM referenced it as they streamlined. Business schools taught it as gospel, and for decades, it worked. But here's the problem. The Shamrock still assumed that you were hiring people across all 3 leaves. But in 2025, that model is outdated. Because with AI, one person can run the entire Shamrock alone. So here's how I imagine, how I see the Shamrock looking like now. The core leaf, that's you. But you're not the operator. You are the system designer. Your job is to choose the problem that is worth solving, sell the value, and design the workflow. Then you've got the contractor leaf with AI agents and platforms, because instead of hiring copywriters and assistants or analysts, AI fills those roles. I mean, Jasper writes and Midjourney designs and Notion AI organizes and Rocket and Lovable build apps. And then your flexible leaf, your marketplaces and on-demand specialists, because when you do need a human, you don't hire them full-time. You tap into platforms like Fiverr and Upwork or fractional consultants for high ROI tasks. And then I believe the 4th leaf is your identity and brand, because that credibility used to take weeks and thousands of dollars. But today, tools like design.com, for example, let you spin up logos and websites and pitch decks in a couple minutes. One piece that oftentimes people forget in this new one-person model is brand. Because no matter how smart your systems are, if you don't look credible, you won't get taken seriously. So let me share a little bit about design.com, because you know I like them and I like to work with them and we use them a lot. They give you instant access to the kind of assets that used to take weeks and thousands of dollars to create. Logos, websites, pitch decks, entire brand kits. And here's the key. You don't just get pretty graphics. You get a cohesive identity that makes clients trust you from the very first click. And given that we live in a world where anyone can spin up an AI tool, brand is what separates the hobbyist from the professionals. And the best part is that you don't need a design degree or an agency retainer. You log in, you describe your vision, and in minutes, you've got a polished brand package that is ready to deploy across your business. So if you're serious about building a one-person business that looks and feels legit, start with design.com, because in this new economy, brand is leverage too. Okay, so this is, in my opinion, Shamrock 2.0, the one-person business model. And the point isn't just efficiency, okay? It's leverage. What once required dozens of employees and millions of dollars in capital can now be orchestrated by one founder with AI agents, with platforms, and with brand tools. One person can structure and scale a company without building a company. And I think the deeper shift that almost nobody talks about is the fact that in the new economy, the game isn't about stacking AI anymore. It's about building assets, tasks, get done once, but assets keep producing forever. A YouTube video, a digital product, a software tool, a library of agents or automations, these are assets that work while you sleep. In the old world, assets required factories and patents or millions in capital, but today, one person with AI can build them in a weekend. And in my opinion, that's the difference between hustling endlessly and compounding wealth. The people who treat AI as a toy will probably still be stuck in tasks. The people who use AI to build assets will own machines that work for them. So if you take away anything from this video, here is what history shows us. Those who resisted steam, electricity, or the internet, they lost. Sometimes they lost everything. Those who adapted early, even ordinary people, built generational wealth. And today is no different. You can be a tool collector, drowning in apps and prompts, or you can be a systems owner, designing a Shamrock 2.0 that compounds every single week. The future of business isn't teams, it's outcomes. And AI just made it possible for one person to do the work of 10. For the first time, the same tools that Fortune 500 companies use are sitting on your laptop. You don't need millions in capital. You don't need a team of 50. You need the ability to orchestrate, to design systems, to multiply yourself with AI, and to seize this window before it closes. So here comes the real question. When the dust settles, will you be the one-person business building with AI, or the one left behind still stacking tools that don't fit? Trust me, collect assets, not apps. You want to own systems, not stress. All right, you guys, that was it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Like this video if you did. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so. Share it with anyone in your circle of friends or family. In the meantime, if you want to practice this together with over 11,000 other people, you are always more than welcome to join our community. It is completely free. Please take your time to answer the 3 questions. We do take that very seriously. And if you feel like you want to be surrounded by people who are on the exact same path as you are, that is the place to be. So I'll see you on the other side. Thank you again for taking the time and watching this video till the end. I really, really appreciate it. I know your time is valuable. So thank you for taking the time and for being here with us every single video we post. And hopefully I'll see you in the community. Have a great day.